Welcome, Clive and Jane. So good to see you. And we had such a great time in our Maoz Israel event. If you haven't seen that, you need to go back and rewatch just the whole conversation, looking at the gospel, Israel, and the UK church. But now we get some post-event time with the man and woman themselves. Clive, I've heard you talk a lot about having a kingdom mindset, especially for church leaders. Can you unpack what that means?
I think when we have a kingdom mindset, we understand the bigger picture of what God is doing. If you go right back, through the Old Testament, Genesis into Exodus, and you go through the kind of biblical narrative and story coming into the New Testament, that helps us to have a bigger picture of what is God doing, how is he unfolding his plans and his purposes. And when you do that, you see where Israel is, you see where the Jewish people are in that story, and you then see where the cross is and why there was a need for the cross, which primarily Jesus came as a Jew first for the Jews, and then the New Testament begins to explain then how we then as Gentiles, as we respond to the gospel, we are then grafted in to the promises that God gave the Jewish people in the Old Testament. So therefore we understand there's a bigger story and a bigger narrative than just thinking about the church. I think in our Western culture, when we often think about the church, and we then filter everything we hear through a church mindset or a church lens, and we then even filter kingdom things through a church lens, and we say, well, how does that fit in with my church mindset and understanding? Because when I think church, I think that is what God's doing. We actually have quite a narrow understanding of the church sometimes as well, because we think church, Gentiles. When God thinks church, he thinks ecclesia, he thinks the people of God, he thinks his kingdom purposes, which is to the Jew first, then to the Gentiles, which Paul covers in Romans 1:16. When we understand God's bigger perspective and purposes like that, we understand that when the word church or ecclesia is used, God, as far as he's concerned, that the church or the people of God is Jew and Gentile together in Christ, in terms of people being born again into a relationship with God. So I think that's why it's so important to have a kingdom understanding and mindset, because then we take on the bigger picture of what God is doing, not just what is happening day to day in my local situation.
Brilliant. Our pastor Glenn talks about a meta narrative versus a micro narrative, and you're absolutely right. It has to be put in the right context of kingdom. Thanks so much for that, Clive. Hey, if you enjoyed that, in our next conversation with Clive and Jane, we're going to be talking about the book of Romans. This is something that Clive has thought about a little bit. And he's got some really great insight for us. So thanks for joining us. See you on the next interview.